Hello, and welcome to EDS Reconnect. My name's Paul Fanning, and I'm Publishing Director at MA Business and Editor of Eureka. Our panel today is on the future of energy, and with me today are, in no particular order, Patrick Le-fevre, Chief Marketing and Communication Officer at POWERBOX, David Oliver, Technical Product and Insight Manager at Inenco, David Picton, Senior Vice President Sustainability at Alcumus, and Randolph Brazier, Director of Innovation at the Energy Networks Association. We've only got 40 minutes today, so I shan't dilly-dally too much, but Patrick, I believe you have a presentation that will set the scene for us, perhaps, so maybe I could start by handing over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm also a member of the United Nations Global Compact and working for the company on energy efficiency and energy solution. We all know that 2 years ago it was an initiative or a big project called the EU Green Deal, and at that time it was the political situation was very much different, and at that time we had a plan to set the rules for less carbon emission, but also that less dependency from import in Europe. Unfortunately, things have changed, and you know the situation about the import from Russia. We are in Europe somewhat depending. There is a lot of activities to reduce this dependency, but nothing happened overnight. What we see is that the European Parliament, Ursula von der Leyen, and the team started another project called REPower for building or accelerating the European Green Deal to reduce the dependency on energy. It sounds very simple and easy, but just reading the press of the last coming days, it's not as easy as it seems. We have a lot of plans and discussion about how to do things, and there's a lot of track to follow. Hydrogen, it's something that we discussed there today, but today the hydrogen is mostly coming from gas reforming. I mean, hydrogen is often considered as an optimum green solution. Again, it's very, very complicated. You don't deploy hydrogens overnight. It takes years to install the transportation, the generation, and especially if you like to go green hydrogen. You have to choose between delivering electricity to your client or doing electricity or using the green energy for producing hydrogen. And we have a couple of examples and experimentations in Europe, especially Denmark, Netherlands, that are very promising. However, they are still far to be reality and implemented. A lot of discussion about how to integrate this type of new energy source distribution, grid balancing, something that will be part of the discussion, I believe, today. We see that in our company, we are a lot of discussion about technology. We are a technology company. That's why that we really believe in nuclear fusion, even we know that it might not happen, might not be connected to the grid overnight. Fusion is one solution that is very interesting. It might take 10, 20, 50, 100 more years. We don't really know, but a lot of things are accelerating in this area. We see a couple of projects, and you guys in the UK, you have shown a pretty good milestone over the last couple of months. You reach very high temperatures in some of the projects, and you are showing that it's possible probably to do a smaller scale system than ITER. That is a huge machinery that has been already delayed and will continue to delay. We don't really know how much the Russian situation will impact, but we know that it will be delayed. However, that we strongly believe that reducing the CO2 and reducing independency to import is definitely the future. So we have no choice. Developing the green hydrogens is moving forward, but it's something that we shouldn't consider just as the only one solution. It's more like a dream that will come true, but not really overnight. And also that there is a lot of acceleration in electrification. Everybody's talking about electrical vehicle, moving some industry from gas to electric heater. Recently, McKinsey published a report that 2050 the consumption of electricity will be triple. It means that we need definitely to have many different ways to generate energy. Again, we believe like nuclear fusion is a promising technology, but we know we are realistic, it will not happen overnight. Thank you very much. And
thank you very much. Thank you very much. Perhaps the best thing might be if I could ask other members of the panel to maybe comment on how they see the situation and how they, in the light of that presentation. David Picton, sorry, the two Davids, I'm going to have to use your surnames. Perhaps if you could start, give us an idea of how you see the situation.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Paul. David Picton, I'm Senior Vice President of Sustainability and ESG at Alcumus. We're focused on technology solutions for risk management, which includes energy, of course, and environmental impact, safety and health. So we see quite a lot of the risks across modern business, and I think energy has risen rapidly. In my mind, I think my perspective would be that energy security is probably the #1 business continuity challenge, and it's risen rapidly. But it reflects not just something that's a passing fad, if you like. I think that this sits alongside other issues that businesses are facing. I think the idea of so-called black swan events, that have previously disrupted business. This is right up there in terms of exposing the fragility of international trading. So when I look at energy, I think we hear the phrases EVs, for example, electric vehicles, but for me, EV stands for energy vulnerability, really. So the way I see it, I think, in the future of energy is that businesses, organisations, governments, all of us, even within communities and societies, we'd have really need to reassess those significant blind spots that we've got in the value chains, but also in the energy chains as well, that support what we have traditionally framed in the way we do things. And so for me, the future of energy really is about reframing that mindset. And if you take the business perspective, it's about adopting a whole company mindset to energy vulnerability, focusing wherever you can on low or no carbon activities, things like products and service design, the processes, materials that we use, the way we make our purchasing decisions, the operational delivery, marketing, communications, everything really, all the way through to people skills and development. And if you look at what's happening in the UK, just in the last week or so, we've announced a new GCSE for young people to help them understand the impact on nature. So we're trying to build the next generation of understanding of environmental impacts and where energy perhaps sits within that. Deloitte are training 1/3 staff. NatWest also training around 16,000 staff in energy and impact on climate. So I think if you can't separate it out into just one form of technology. For me, it's a mindset change that I think we need to have that shift really. And then the final point I guess I'd make is that the technology that I see supporting the future of energy and transforming energy systems is data visibility. I think for too long, perhaps we've had data buried away within organisations, buried away perhaps in spreadsheets, laptops, invoices, all kinds of things really. But I think the need now, as we come together and consider the future of energy and what technologies exist to support different energy supplies, at the other side, we've got to have different technologies to understand the data, the knowledge, the intelligence, the insight, and the decisions we need to be making on the basis of that data, turning it into real actionable intelligence.
Thank you. David Oliver, perhaps you'd like to...
David Oliver. I work for Inenco, been there for 15 years, and we represent very large energy users. But my career started in the late 1980s building power stations. And the thing I'm very aware of is the fact that the way the grid works today and the way it's worked for most of its existence is that if there's increased demand or if the frequency starts falling, you just put more fuel into a power station and it produces more electricity. And that's how we balance our grid. Now, in the future, as we have more and more wind turbines and even nuclear, that ability to pick up load to meet increased demand is not going to be there. So to me, over the next 10 to 15 years, one of the biggest shifts we're going to see is this change from frequency being controlled by generation to frequency being controlled by demand. Now, that's going to have to be an automated process. Some of it will be fairly straightforward. For example, we can switch off EV chargers, we can switch off electrolysis on hydrogen, we can even switch off heat pumps, for example. But there's going to be a fundamental change in the way we control our grid, and storage is going to be an absolute key issue in this. I mean, to me, it's all very well talk about building new nuclear power stations. We need to build another 4 or 5 de Norwigs pump storage solutions, big grid level storage. So I'll let somebody else speak now.
Yeah, Randolph, do you have a take on this?
Sorry, was on mute. Hi everyone, I'm Randolph. I'm Director of Innovation and Electricity Systems at a company called the Energy Networks Association, or ENA. We represent all of the gas and electricity networks in the UK and Ireland at both a transmission level, so a national level, and also a distribution level or a local level. I think the two Davids made some really good points. For us, from a networks position, we see networks as critical to the energy transition and achieving net zero. However, you've got the energy trilemma, right? So you want to achieve net zero, but you've got to balance that against resilience and security of supply, and also ultimately cost to customers. And I think probably for a long time now, the resilience and security of supply part in the UK has been not necessarily ignored, but put on the back burner. We've been a victim of our own success, and we've been focusing mainly on the sort of the carbon aspects and the cost aspects. But obviously now, with various world events, we've had 6 named storms in the UK since December. Resilience is coming back onto the radar. And that's now seen as the key part of the trilemma again, as David P said. And I also agree with him when he said that this is not just about technology. Technology is absolutely critical, of course, and we've seen the success with renewables and EVs starting to be rolled out, of course. On the 29th of January, we hit, for a couple of hours in the middle of the night, we hit 66% wind on the system. So you can see what's happening with technology. But we've also got to create new markets that suit this new system. We've got to have new policies and procedures, regulations in place, new behavioural changes, and also get the next generation lined up for this to ensure we've got the right skills and training available. So largely echo what David P said. I think the other thing that I would mention that we believe is absolutely critical is taking what we call a whole systems approach. Yeah. So historically in energy, things have been quite siloed. Transport's been treated separately, waste's been treated separately, heat's been treated separately, gas and electricity have been treated separately. We've got to get out of that way of thinking now. Everything relies on energy ultimately. So we've got to get out of this siloed thinking and take an engineering systems approach, thinking about the end-to-end system and how we can optimize that and make that more efficient.
Thank you. That leads me on to another question, which is one of the problems that there isn't a sort of clarity of vision of what our energy future actually looks like at a senior level. I don't know who wants to jump in on that. David, Picton?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a stellar point, Paul. I think that echoes what Randolph is saying, and I love the point there about that need to transition the understanding for it, because I think that is at the heart of the vulnerability. I think for years we've been, we collectively, society, we've been busy. We've faced a lot of things over the last few years, and we continue to do. And the last couple of years in particular has disrupted everything we knew about the traditional way things were done. But I think it's absolutely at the heart of that understanding that we need to re-engineer what we're doing. And I think you see that happening as well. I think you see people suddenly recognizing very quickly that there are these fragilities, and organizations and people are responding. If you look at the growth in science-based targets, it's been 117% since this time last year, and partly driven by COP26, of course, in recognition of our climate vulnerability. But energy is fair square to that and the way that comes together. But the interesting point is that whilst we've had some of those recognitions that we need to change our understanding and support a different future for energy and not take it for granted, and it's not going to be there forever. There's a lack of understanding of what to do about that. If you look at what some Boston Consulting Group is saying, less than 1 in 10 of organizations globally are tracking their carbon footprint correctly. Half of them have got errors. of up to 40% in what they think they're doing. 3 out of 4 executives do not understand their carbon footprint of their company and their organization. So although we've come a long way in a lot of cases, that understanding is still quite fragile. And that comes up against some sort of trends where 3 out of 4 consumers, for example, are asking for, or 2/3, if you like, are asking for labeling around products. So people want to understand more, but organizations perhaps haven't stepped up and brought that together. So I think one of the fundamental threats to improving energy security is that lack of data, knowledge, intelligence, and understanding. And in the absence of that, I think there's a risk we might continue to take energy for granted, and we're storing up a storm, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, Patrick, if you have a position on that.
Yes. I mean, we have seen also that in Europe now there is this RePower project to reconsider the power in Europe. But we, as it has been said, we have been acting very silo organization. I mean, it's a lot of political decisions that have been increasing this type of silo situations. Green energy or renewable energy is growing, developing, not as fast as some people would believe, but integrating these type of renewable energy into the grid is not an easy job. And then for the other people, like working with networks, it's a big question. It has been mentioned, energy storage. It's very often discussion about renewable energy without considering long-term energy storage, because it's not possible to generate energy during the night and have a 60% of your power consumption peak during the night when there is no demand, and having a situation where you shut off your wind farm because there is no demand. And there is a lot of new things that we need to learn. We are I think now discovering a new world where you need to really be more interconnected together. I really hope the project like RePower or the European Green Deal will make possible to better work, but it's a long way to go.
Can I come on that, Paul?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, I actually think we do have a good vision of what we want. We want net zero by 2050. And, that's across the whole economy. And also it's bipartisan, right? And it's broadly speaking bipartisan across Europe. So that is actually quite a good vision. And a lot of other countries in the world do not have that vision. So I think the overarching vision is there personally. However, and I think this is what David was getting to, is we don't know how to get there. That's what we don't have clarity on. So if you think about the 3 key parts of energy where emissions come from, you've got electricity, transport, and heating. Electricity, we were 43% renewables last year. We're doing okay. We got a pretty good vision of what a net zero electricity system could look like. There's issues around inertia, but we've got a fairly good idea. Transport, we've got a fairly good idea for cars and light goods vehicles. They're probably going to go electric. So if the electricity's green, then you're on the right track there to decarbonise that. Heavy transport, unclear. Still a long way to go in that space. Will it be hydrogen? Maybe. What role will electrification play? Other fuel, biofuels and things like that. Shipping and aviation, not sure. So unclear how to get to net zero there. And then heating, that's pretty much the elephant in the room, right? No one knows what's going to happen there, particularly in this country. And the policies around this are unclear. And also, it's really hard doing something in the home. As soon as you go into someone's home and tell them, how to change their behaviour or how to, change the fabric of their home or change their heating source, that's really difficult politically. So we're really unclear about how to, in particular, decarbonise the heating section. But I think, the vision is there. It's the steps and the how-to that is unclear.
Yeah. Okay.
Just pick up on that about the household heating. I mean, to me, it seems crazy that we're still building houses with gas boilers. I mean, we all know that in probably 15 years when that boiler needs replacing, it's probably going to have to be replaced by a heat pump. So the question is, well, why are we building a house today that's not heat pump ready? You know, there's always this discussion about we're going to ban boilers, gas boilers in 5 years' time, and it seems to be going on every year that we hear the same story. And I think people need to be more, you know, more immediate and say, look, even if you don't put a gas boiler in, even if you don't put a heat pump in today, the new house has to be heat pump ready. It has to have underfloor heating and so on. And I think those decisions should be, you know, made as soon as possible, because it's so much cheaper to do it now rather than retrofit.
I mean, new builds, right? New builds, it makes absolute sense to put a heat pump in, and also make the standard of the building high. You know, the average rating per house in this country is something like an E, whereas in continental Europe it's a C. So raise the standards of new builds and make them heat pump ready. Absolutely. I think the trickier part, or much trickier part, is retrofit. 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 already exist now. They're already built, and how to retrofit them, particularly some that are very poor standard, is incredibly difficult.
I suppose this leads on to a wider discussion of what the consequences of this will be for energy users, how their future will look, and whether this is being adequately communicated. I wonder if anyone has any views on that one.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think exactly that adequate communication, it links back, you know, not to bang on about it, but it links back to a change in mindset. I think, you know, if you look at businesses, take the business context, for example, some of the facts and figures coming out of the Carbon Trust suggest that a 20% cut in energy, if you like, cut in energy costs would have the same impact on their bottom line, which is quite often where their focus is, of course, as a 5% increase in sales. And you see the average company spending about 10, 15, 25, even 50% of their budgets on marketing and sales, but up to half of companies spend nothing at all on energy efficiency. You know, so it is that fundamental shift of understanding I think we need, and that has to come alongside another thing that we're not been traditionally very good at, is recognizing we've got to work together. So we've got to go beyond the traditional boundaries, I think, of organisations and go into the supply chain, go up into our, you know, to our suppliers, go down into our clients, and expand our thinking and our actions and our understanding across those boundaries. Now, it's hard. It's not easy to do at all. It's complicated. There's lots of reasons why culturally we're not set up to do that, but we need to grasp that just because it's hard. It's not something we can ignore, I think. And as I was saying earlier on, the longer we continue to not act on that and take those hard decisions, work together to solve these kinds of issues in a proper collaboration approach, the sooner we get on with that, I think, you know, the better we will be in protecting that future of energy.
I think also government policy tends to be very much focused on industrial and commercial users. But if you take natural gas, for example, which is obviously the big issue, is decarbonising the gas grid. Industrial use about 100 terawatt hours per year, commercial is about the same, but domestic's 300 terawatt hours. So the really big gas usage is actually at domestic level, but this comes back to education and so on, but also it comes back to, you know, new builds, for example, having heat pumps from day one. The government seems to be avoiding dealing with the voter, should we say. And yeah, that's going to have to happen.
Yeah. Randolph, do you have a position on that?
I agree with the two Davids. I think they hit it spot on. There needs to be an education campaign, and you know, government needs to help people understand and give them choice and help them on this journey, and it probably hasn't happened to date. And yeah, it hasn't needed to. When you think about renewables, at the end of the day, in your house, you still plug your devices into the same wall socket. You don't really know where the electricity is coming from, and most people probably don't care. But when it comes to something like heating and changing that in the house, that's a really different kettle of fish. So there has to be some sort of education campaign and you know, helping people understand what options they have, what choices they have, and how they can help in the race to net zero.
Can I just pick up, because I think Randolph makes a stellar point there. It might sound a light-hearted point, but if you look at the apocalyptic movies that we watch, and our families watch and what have you, most of them at some stage, if you just follow any of them, the second one, of Planet of the Apes, the whole focus of the story was getting energy switched back on, and in the absence of energy, most people these days couldn't look at their family photographs because they're on their phone. And this idea, in the absence of energy, we have this potentially apocalyptic future facing us, and it is a bit lighthearted because, of course, movies are what they are, but there's a real grain of truth in that, I think, and that picks up on what Randolph, David, Patrick have been saying. Yeah.
Patrick, do you have anything to add?
Yes, it has been said several times during the panel. I mean, better coordinations between the different nations as well is very important, because today we are very working each in his own country and individual, and then we have a lot of discussion about Europe and how to do better things. But at the end, each country is independent. If we see what's happened now with the nuclear, France is going to build new nuclear plant, or at least this is the plan from the re-elected president. Some other countries like Germany, they have decided to switch off after this Fukushima and the green pressures, and now they are in a kind of paradox where they have to use coal instead of something else. We are in a situation where Europe has to play a big role. And when I say Europe, I know that you Brexit, but at least that to me it's the same part. We are all in the same boat, and it's very important that we have better corporations. Deploying wind farms offshore is wonderful, but it has to be connected to the rest. It's more like a butterfly effect. What we do in Sicilia, for example, will have an impact on the north of Sweden. And the big problem I see today is that there are a lot of again silo, not only on the technology but also on the politics. And also we are taking the energy for granted. As you mentioned, that you plug your telephone for charging and you don't care from where comes the electricity. I believe if the situation, and you mentioned apocalypse, we might not be there, but we might be in a situation that we have to reduce our power consumptions in the coming weeks, months, due to the present situations. And that might be a wake-up call for a lot of people. I believe that we have really to change our mind, but it will require a lot of educations. Nothing will come overnight. We shouldn't expect everything coming from our politicians. It's a collective attitude that needs to be changed, and also a new way of thinking energy.
That's an interesting point, and leads into, I mean, how do we see the role of government in this process? Because it seems to me, sometimes that's unclear. I mean, obviously they lead by setting, they set the targets, but what should be, in your opinions, the role that they play?
Can I jump in? Sorry,
yeah.
David, go on.
No, you go.
No, I was going to say, people talk about regulation, I guess, and legislation, which of course is one part of that role to play as well. But I think there's a slightly lighter step in that as well, because if you look at things like international benchmarks and frameworks, you can use international benchmarks for best practice, and I'm thinking here ISO 50001, for example, are internationally recognized energy management standard, best practice of frameworks, systems, processes. So that exists already without necessarily the need for additional legislation. It links into things like work winning, tenders, becoming a required standard and so on, and it drives cost savings and compliance reporting and so on. And some of the analysis suggests that if you do that, so if you adopted ISO 15001 across the commercial and industrial sectors globally, so if you mandated that you needed to follow this international best practice framework, that could save something like 6.5 billion tons of CO2, something around about 200 plus million cars off the road. So there are, without going all the way through to the stick of legislation, if you like, there are nudge points along the way, I think, that exist already.
Yeah, I mean, there are things the government can and have done in terms of influencing. I mean, for example, saying that there'll be no new cars after 2030 that aren't electric. I mean, that's a government decision which will actually drive a process. If they were to suddenly say today that from next year onwards you can't build a new house without an air source heat pump, that again would be a government decision that would make an impact. So they do have the ability to make those impacts. And I think where the problem's been is that they tend to be very shy of directly influencing domestic properties and try and put all the policies onto industrial and commercial customers, even though they're not potentially the biggest consumers.
Yeah, and the challenge, of course, is that it's politics, as we know, is a short-term business, of course, and in energy vulnerability is a mid to long-term challenge, really, isn't it? So there is a disconnect.
Yeah, I always say that the people who came up with the 2050 target for net zero were the ones that knew that I'd be dead or retired by then. And that's the trouble, actually. The immediacy is actually what we see driving things. I mean, some of our customers, for example, they've started to introduce sustainability targets into director remuneration. And when that happens, we can see the impact immediately.
Yeah.
And those are the sort of steps that people have to do actually to make these things look more immediate, so people take more action. I mean, COVID's a great example. People talked about what happens if a pandemic happens. Nobody really did anything. When it did happen, and it was immediate, there was a lot of action taking place.
Yeah.
Randolph,
do you have a? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No, sorry.
Oh, you go, David.
I mean, we need to learn lessons from history. I mean, there've been some recent things quite interesting. I mean, in the start of lockdown 2020, when we had the spring bank holiday, the grids had such little demand and we had such high generation of solar at the time that we were actually paying people to switch off generation or to increase demand and so on. And we were shipping power out to France, and we were running everything in pump storage mode. We were having to make big changes to the grid to make it work. And that's the sort of thing that's going to happen more and more in the future. We need to really learn from those sort of events. And then if you take the year before, August 2019, we had that blackout. We had 2 power stations went down, an offshore wind farm and a combined cycle power station. We lost about 1,200 megawatts of generation, and large parts of the country were disconnected. We had, only for an hour, but it caused chaos. We've got to remember, in the end of this decade, we'll have Hinkley Point power station running with a 1,600 megawatt generator. What happens if that trips? So there are some things we've got to look ahead and say, right, this went wrong a few years ago. How can we make sure it doesn't happen again?
Absolutely. Randolph, sorry.
No worries, Paul. Yeah, I mean, to answer your question on government, at the end of the day, energy is an infrastructure-heavy sector. So you're inevitably going to need quite a lot of leadership, support, intervention from government and regulators for all the reasons that David's mentioned then. But I think there's also a key role for government in supporting the vulnerable, enabling markets and enabling competition where it makes sense, and also enabling customer choice and customer information. So I think, that it's partial policy setting, intervention, regulation, and it's partial facilitating the market where it makes sense and enabling competition, enabling innovation, enabling people to come up with interesting and unique ways to decarbonise and support net zero, while still supporting the vulnerable and those who can't afford to do it.
Patrick, do you have a view on the role of government in this process?
Not so much to say. I mean, it's I always try to stay away from politics, but it's for sure. We need a better, I would say, better way of working. I mean, it's very often that we are saying that, but there are some part of the Europe and Europe plus UK that is wonderful and working well. Energy need to be not only regulated, but it need a common effort to go on the same direction.
Okay. Right, we've only got 3.5 minutes left, but I've got a kind of a big question here from in the chat, which is from Mark Beddoe, and the question is growth sustainable? So if you wouldn't mind each sort of taking about 30 seconds to answer that one.
Okay, I'll jump in. Yeah, I'll jump in. I think a great question, thank you, Mark. And I think it can be it isn't sustainable the way we've been doing it. I think is probably the thread. Hopefully you've picked up from what I've been saying. I think growth can be sustainable, but we have to reshape it and build it on sustainable thinking. It has to be built on a different mindset with different attitudes, different approaches to technology, and a different mix as well in terms of how we drive that growth. And it comes back up partly to the point we made about the politics as well. If growth is to be sustainable, it's got to be framed around a mid to long term view of what that growth is and what it looks like. And there are really encouraging moves, I think, around in business these days, certainly over the last year or so, showing that the companies are willing to take perhaps a shorter term, slower growth or even sort of flat growth, if like no growth at all, if that develops a longer term success. So it's that longer term mindset that I think is essential.
Okay, anyone else on that one?
Yeah, so I'd say growth is only sustainable if the resources are available to feed it. So I mean, if you want to have an industry where it's got electrical usage, then there's plenty more potential for offshore wind farms and solar and so on. But if you wanted to do something which was involving the use of gas, for example, then no, it's not sustainable. So it's about whether the resources are going to be available long term.
Okay, Patrick.
Anyway, growth is growth, and then we have to accommodate with the market. Everything is driven by external factors, but we definitely need to reconsider our complete energy to support growth, if any growth.
Okay, admirably succinct there. Randolph.
Yeah, broadly agree with the others. Growth can be sustainable, but I think the metrics also need to change. You can't just have financial metrics anymore. Why do we still care about GDP so much? Why aren't we focusing on things like the Human Development Index, for example, which measures a whole range of different factors apart from just financial ones?
Okay. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that one? Got a few seconds left.
I would suggest, I think Randolph makes the right point there. We do need to reframe what we mean by success, what we mean by growth, what we mean by the future. Areas like well-being indices as well. That there are a whole range of wider and much richer and much more rewarding ways of looking at what the future looks like for us. But we are in it together, and we're going to have to make some mindset changes very quickly if we're going to harvest that.
Okay, right. Well, I'm sorry to have to bring things to a close there. I think that the conversation could easily have gone on a lot longer and gone into much more depth, but we work to deadlines. But with that, really, I just wanted to say thank you to all our panelists today for a fascinating discussion, and of course, thank you very, very much to all our viewers. Thank you.
Thank you.